Today we're going to add the area of effect mechanic for our spells, because if we want to be able to target multiple tiles at the same time, well, right now it's impossible, so that's why we need to add it. So let's get to it. And actually, before jumping into the real subject of the video, I'm just going to take a bit of time just to clean up one of our structure. We have the spell attack cast structure that we created in the previous video, and actually if I open it right now, we can see that we have 4 variables related to the line of sight, and I don't think it's really nice to have them right there written like line of sight underscore something. That's not pretty. So instead of having all that right here, what I'm gonna do is just move them inside another structure specifically for the line of sight. So it's going to be a little bit cleaner. So what I'm gonna do here is go back right there and duplicate my spell attack cast structure. I'm going to rename it spell attack underscore line of sight, and then I will just open it, and actually I will open both structure just to make the changes on both structure at the same time. And this is how it looks once I'm done modifying the structure. So here on the left we have the spell attack cast as before, but I replace all 4 variables by the new structure we just created. So the S spell attack line of sight right here that I have, its name line of sight, and now we have all 4 variables right here at the bottom. We can collapse them if we don't want to see them, and we can show them if we want to. So I think it's more clean like that. And on the right side right here, we have all 4 variables that we had before inside the cast structure directly, but now they are moved inside the line of sight structure. I just took a bit of time just to rename them a little bit, just to remove the prefix that we added before, just so it's a little bit cleaner. And now we have both structure created and ready to be used. So we're just gonna go back in the game and see where we have to replace the code, fix the code, just so it's going to work as it was working before, because right now the code doesn't compile anymore. And that's exactly what Unreal tells us right here. We have 2 blueprints that don't compile anymore, so we can just open both of them and see what we have to fix. The first one is the combat system. So right here we have 4 errors. So let's go with the first one right here. We can see that it tries to connect the line of sight to the branch directly. We can say it doesn't work, so we're just gonna have to break the structure first, and then we can connect the required line of sight back to the branch, just like that. And then we have 3 more errors to fix, so let's go see how they look. Right here, same thing, we have to use the new structure, so we have to break the line of sight structure and access the, which one is this? The height from ground, so let's connect the height from ground right here. And then we're gonna do the same thing for the other one, so I'm gonna go here, which was using the offset from center, so let's reconnect the offset from center, just like that. And the last one at the end right here was using the draw debug line. So let's connect the draw debug line just like that. Here we go. So now all the errors should be fixed. If we compile, here we go. The combat system is now fixed and ready to be used. Now we're just going to close it real quick and go fix the button. Now I'm gonna go in the graph. And here actually it's not that hard to fix, we just have to make the line of sight. So I'm just gonna make a line of sight and reconnect all the input pins to the make a line of sight, just like that, like that, like that, and like that. And now we can just disconnect all the previous lines that were connected, and we should now have a code ready to be used as before. Good, so now if I try to play, we can see that it works perfect. And now we're finally ready to work on the mechanic that we are supposed to develop today, which is the area of effect for our spells. And the first thing I think we should do is adding a way to display the tiles that are targeted by the spell, because when we are casting a spell that is area of effect, we want the player to know that this spell is going to target multiple tiles at the same time. So what I think we should do is first adding a new color to our tile. So inside the grid utilities, we're gonna add a new state to be able to display that new color. So the new state is the spell range AoE, just like this, and we're gonna go use it inside the grid mesh inst right there when we are setting all the colors and stuff. And actually right here I took a little bit of time just to reshuffle a few things. Right here I have my priority list first on the left, and I reshuffled a few things because I think this order makes more sense than the previous order, because I saw a few weird things happening when we were drawing spells on the grid, and I think that order makes a little bit more sense. So the spell range AoE and spell range are now more important than the selected and overt and things like that. So that's the new order. If you want a reference here in the bottom left, I just kept my previous order if you need it, but this is the new order and I think it makes more sense. And actually at the same time I also reshuffled a few colors right here in the bottom right corner. We can see the previous colors, but now these are the new colors, and if you are interested by the last one that we just added today, it is a new tint of orange for the spell range AoE, a little bit brighter than the spell range. That way it is a little bit more obvious which tiles are targeted for reals. Okay, so this is everything we needed to change for the grid mesh inst and the new tile state, so we can close both of those. And now perfect, we have a way to display the AoE tiles on the grid, but we don't have any data telling us which tiles we want to display. So what we're gonna do is just add that data inside the structures for our spell. So I'm gonna go in my spell utilities here and open the S spell data. Here we have already a structure that tells us the data for the cast. So great, that structure contains the pattern, the range, the line of sight, and everything we need to know. So what we're going to do is just use that same structure but for the AoE, because it's going to contain a range, min-max for the range, a range pattern. If maybe we want to use the line of sight for the AoE also, why not? So what we're going to do is just use this structure for both the cast of the spell and also for the AoE tiles. So let's just create a new variable for it. Here we go, so I just created my new variable right here. It is of type s_spell_cast, same as the previous one, and I renamed it cast AoE because it is the cast of our spell AoE. So great, that's done. Now we can just save and close the structure and we're ready to use it. And now we need to go feed all the information we need in the structure. So we're going to do that inside the debug menu in our action, in the action, so show spell range pattern right here. We have all the variables we need for the spell range. We're gonna duplicate most of them just so we can use them also for the area of effect. And this is how it looks. I changed a few things. So first I added two categories right here, which is just a text with a different color, just so we can differentiate what is the normal spell, the area of effect category, and then we have the line of sight specific variables right here that we're gonna use for both the area of effect and also for the spell. So that's why I'm not duplicating those. So here I just added those three new components. So I have the combo box for the pattern for the area of effect. Then I have the spin box for the range of the area of effect, and finally I have this checkbox for the area of effect. What we're going to do is just implement those three events, and we're going to populate this combo box inside the graph, the same way we did for the first combo box right here. So let's implement all the events first. So on select and change for the combo box, then we have the range here, and finally we have the checkbox, just like that. And then we can connect them with all the other events right here. Here we go, so now the three events are connected with the other ones, so that should work. And now what we're gonna do is go in the pre-construct here at the top to populate the second combo box the same way we did for the first one. And when I say the same way, it's going to be the exact same way. So we're just going to call the exact same code on both combo boxes at the same time. So I'm just going to drag my second combo box right here and connect it to the clear option. Then I'm going to duplicate it, connect it to the add option. And finally, duplicating a last time to connect it to the set selected index, just like that. So now all the code is executed on both combo boxes at the same time. So if we go back in the designer, we should see that this combo box is also populated the same way as that combo box. So now both of them are displaying line. So that works great. The next step is to handle the visibility of the components. So I'm gonna go right here in the set visibility and add all the new components to them. So oops, not this one, this new spell box. And then we have the new checkbox. And then we have the new text block. So we have the text blocks AoE and line of sight. And finally, we have the last one, which is the new spin box right here. So I'm just going to connect all of those to both the visibilities. And that's done. Now the last step we have to do is to feed the data right here on the right. We are setting the cast structure, but we're going to create a second structure inside that blueprint to contain the cast data for the area of effect also. So let's go in there in the show spell range action right here and create ourselves a new variable. So I'm just going to duplicate the cast and rename it the cast AoE. And now we can compile and go back inside the button to set the variable. So I'm just going to set the cast AoE, just like that. We're gonna do it before the delay, obviously. And now we're gonna populate it exactly the same way we did for the cast right there. And this is how it looks. So I just duplicated most of the data that was up there. Actually, I duplicated everything, but I just made sure to replace all three components right here. So I have my combo box range for the range AoE. I have my spin box spell range for the AoE also. And finally, the checkbox line of sight AoE. So we're gonna use these three new components instead of the previous ones, but the rest is everything is the same. So that's how it's done. And now we just have to go do the action itself. So let's go back in the action, select item unit and show spell range pattern right here. And actually, since it's pretty similar to the show spell range pattern function, what I'm gonna do is just duplicate that function and rename it show spell range pattern AoE. And then what I'm going to do is just change a few things in there, and then I'm going to show you what I did because it's not much, but still there's a few things here and there. We want to change the enum, we want to change the cast structure and things like that. So I'm just going to do it real quick and show it to you. And this is how it goes. So first, here it's super simple. We just have to clear the state the same way we did before, but we are now using the new state we just created. So it's spell range AoE. That's it, that's simple. This next part right here is a little bit more complex though, because we have to make sure that the tile that is under the mouse at the moment is actually a tile that is part of the range of our spells, because we don't want to display the AoE if we are overing a tile that is all the way at the opposite side of the world. We don't care about that tile. We just care about the tiles that are inside the range. So that's why here we are making sure that the tile we are overing is inside the range of the spell. Otherwise, we're not going to display anything because it will not make sense. Then here we can go on the right here, and we are just checking to make sure that the range AoE, we want to display a pattern. So we are asking ourselves, okay, do we want to display a pattern or not? If we want to display a pattern, well, we are going to generate a pattern and display it. But otherwise, we're still going to display a range, actually not a range, but a state on the tile. We are still going to display the same color as we are displaying when we are doing the AoE spells. That way, the player is always going to know which tiles are targeted because it's going to use the same color. So that's why I'm using still the state right here. I'm still adding the state, even though we're not displaying any range pattern for the AoE. But I think it makes more sense if we are displaying the same color. That way the player knows that the tile is targeted. But if you don't like it, you can just remove that part. It doesn't matter. So yeah, we are using the over tile instead of the selected tile, and we are still adding the is spell range AoE right here. But otherwise, if we are displaying a range pattern, so if it is not equal to none right here, we're going to go all the way here at the top, which is the same thing that we did in the show range pattern, but instead of using the selected tile, we are using the over tile because we are overing a tile on the grid. We want to display the range AoE around that specific tile. So that's why we are using the over tile, and we are using the cast AoE because, well, we don't want to display the spell range. We want to display the AoE range. So that's why we are using that one. And finally, right here at the state to tile, we are adding the new state we just created. So is spell range AoE right here. And that's it for this new function. Now we just have to go call it, and there's a few places we need to call that function. So first, in the show spell range right here, every time this function is going to be called, we're going to also update the AoE. That way it might clear it most of the time, but otherwise it's going to update the AoE based on the new range that we are displaying. So if the spell range updates, we also want to update the AoE range. And the way I'm doing it is just by adding a sequence at the beginning right here. And first we are updating the spell range, and then we are updating the AoE. That way, if the branch fails right here, it will still work, and same thing at the end of the loop. So I just think it's more clean if we put it at the beginning right here with a sequence. And the second place where we want to call this function is every time that the player overs a new tile. So when the player passes his cursor over a new tile, we want to make sure that if the range was selected and things like that, to display the AoE range. But right now it's not really possible to do that because we only have, let's say right here on the left, we have the execute action function right here that is only called when the player clicks on a new tile. So we don't have anything telling us that the player passes his cursor over a new tile. It's only when he clicks on it. So we're going to need to create a new action, a new function inside the parent class to be able to call it every time the user passes his cursor over a new tile. So let's go back in the folder that contains this action, and actually I'm going to go in my action and open directly BP action, so the parent class of all of our actions. And right here we have the execute action function that we created a long time ago. And what I'm going to do is just duplicate that function to have a second function that is going to be called that one every time that we are overing a new tile. So I renamed it execute hovered action, and then we are going to call this function inside the BP player action. So I'm going to go back here in player and open the BP player actions. And if we go in the event graph right here, we have a new event, actually an event that is called every time we are overing a new tile. So at the same time that this event is called, we are also going to call this new function we created inside the left click and the right click action. And this is how it looks. I know it's a little bit more packed than it was before, but it's still super simple. So here how it goes. Here, if I have hovered a new tile, so I'm hovering a new tile right here. I'm going to do a sequence to do the left click and right click the same way we did before, but this time what we are doing is, if the left click is valid, we're going to start with that, and then if it's true, we can execute the new function we created, so the execute hovered action right here on the left click. And then once that's done, well, we can still check if we are holding the left click down and then execute the real action if it is the case. And then we are doing the exact same thing for the right click. So if we have a right click action selected, we can simply execute the hovered action, passing the hover tile because the hover tile just changed, so we are executing the new function. And then we finally check if the right click is down, and if it's true, well, we are executing the right click action. And that's as simple as that. So it looks a little bit more complex than what it is because we are connecting multiple things together, but it's still super simple in the end. So great. Okay, now we have this new function that is called, and it is inside the BP action, so it is inside the parent class. So what we can do now is go inside the new action, so the action select tile and unit and show spell range pattern. We can override that action to execute what we want to do, which is generated the AoE range. So what I'm going to do is just override right here in my function, override the execute hovered action that I have right there. I can reconnect the parent because we're still going to keep it, why not? And then what we want to do is regenerate the pattern AoE. So I can just call that part of the code. So right here, we don't want to regenerate the whole range pattern because we don't want to do that every time we are hovering a new tile. That doesn't make sense. But we want to regenerate the AoE range because it changes depending on the tile that is hovered. Well, great. So now we have everything we need and it should work in game, I think. So let's go try and see how it goes. And here we go. Now I'm going to select my action and we can see that we have all the new options we added to it. So that's good. And by default, they are line and line. So let's see how it looks by default. Okay, so I have my line pattern at the beginning on the floor. And then when I pass my cursor over a tile that is inside the range, we can see that it displays another line on top of it because it displays the AoE of that spell based on what we input here. So that's good. Let's see what happens if I change it to a star now. Okay, so now it draws a star on top of my range. Okay, so I have my range displayed and my AoE also. Good. So let's say I'm just going to change it to a diamond. I think it makes a little bit more sense. It's a little bit more clean, so that's good. And now let's say, what if I try a square? I'm just going to make it smaller because otherwise it's too big, I think. But yeah, here we go. Here I have a square drawn on my grid, so I can target any of those tiles. Here we go. I can see that I can target a square shape anywhere on my grid. We have the line of sight that is not really testable right now because we don't have any obstacle on the grid, but I know that it works, so just trust me and make sure it works on your side, I guess. You can just spawn an obstacle and see to make sure that the line of sight also works for the AoE if you want to. Well, okay, so that's good. We have the basics. We are now able to draw a spell's AoE range for our spell on the grid, but right now we can't really cast the spell. So let's say what happens if we are selecting our test spell to see if we try to cast it. Well, that spell right now doesn't have any AoE range on it, so we're just going to start by adding the AoE range on the spell, and then we'll see what we have to change to make it work. And the first thing we have to do is to add it to the data table for the spell. So I'm going to go in my spells, open the DT spell data right here, which contains the test spell that we have, and we have the cast AoE structure right there. So now it doesn't have any range AoE right here because the pattern is set to none. But what I'm going to do is just set it to square, I don't care, and let's say 0 to 2 for the range. I think that's good enough. So now we can save the data table, and then we just have to also change something in the button that is in the user interface because right now it doesn't feed that data to the real action. So what I'm going to do is go in my action, actually no, in my debug menu instead, debug menu action, and open button action cast spell because this is happening inside the button. So I'm going to go in the graph right there. And here we can see that it is fetching the spell data from the spell data table, which is good, and it is setting the cast structure. But now we just have to also set the cast AoE. So I'm just going to do the same thing. So set the cast AoE just like that, and then we can just reconnect it like so. So now that should be good enough, and the code should execute properly the same way we are doing when we are creating our custom range with the other action. So now I'm just gonna play and see what happens if I try to cast my spell now. And now let's select the spell and click on the grid. Okay, good, we can see the range, that's good. And we can see the AoE range also. So that's great, that works, it seems to work perfectly, so great. And now if I try to cast my spell on one tile, okay, it only casts it on that specific tile. It doesn't affect all the other tiles that are supposed to be affected. So that's bad. And that's what we need to fix, because right now the animation is not made to work for the area of effect of our spell. Actually, nothing in the combat system works with the area of effect. So let's go fix the combat system real quick, and that should conclude the video once that's done. So let's go do that. I'm gonna go in my combat and open BP combat system. And we're gonna go inside the cast spell function, and what we need to change is right here at the end when we are spawning our spell. So right now we are spawning the spell and we are trying to display the spell on the grid, but we are only using the target index. So we are setting the target indexes of the spell, so the spell is going to display on those indexes, but right now we are only passing it the target index. So instead of doing that, we want to get the target indexes based on the area of effect. So if we are targeting 10 indexes or things like that, we want to feed all those 10 indexes to that function instead of just feeding it the target index the way we are doing right now. So what I'm going to do is just first move this a little bit and create myself a new local variable, which I'm going to name the attacked indexes. So the index that we are attacking with the spell, it's different than the one that we are targeting, because we are targeting one specific tile on the grid, but we are attacking multiple tiles at the same time if it is a spell with area of effect. And now that the indexes are stored inside a variable, well, we have to set the variable before calling the spawn actor. So that's what I'm doing right here. So in the case that the spell we are trying to cast doesn't have an AoE, doesn't have a zone area of effect, well, we just want to use the target index and pass it to the attack indexes the same way we were doing before, because we are only targeting one index, and that's good enough. The spell is going to be casted on only one tile, and that's perfect. That's exactly what we want. But in the case that we are trying to cast a spell that is an area of effect, well, this is going to be false right here, because it's not going to be equal to none. And if it is the case, well, we just have to generate the spell range of that area of effect just to be able to generate the attack indexes. So here I'm taking my target index, getting the spell range from that target index. So I'm clicking on one tile and I'm generating the area of effect around the tile, same thing we are doing already. And then we can just pass it the cast AoE, which is all the information it needs to generate the range. And then we can just set the attack index using that range. So now we can select the tile on the grid, cast a spell to it. It's going to generate the AoE range, and then pass it to the spawn actor, which is going to spawn multiple tiles on all the attacked indexes. And now we can probably test it in game. So let's go try and see how it looks. I'm gonna go select my spell right here, go use my test spell on the grid. And now if I right click, we can see that it spawns a bunch of tiles, because it spawns one tile for each tile in my AoE. So great, that seems to work perfectly actually. That's pretty good. And now I can spawn really a ton of tiles. Woo! Okay, anyway. But yeah, that works and that's great. But there's just one little bug I want to fix before ending the video actually. Here, if I go right here, we can see that first I'm able to target the tiles that are under the obstacle. So if I pass my cursor over a tile that is an obstacle, we can see that I can still cast a spell onto it, and that's not what I want. I don't want to be able to cast my spell on the obstacles and any other things that are not targetable on the grid. So if I have like an invalid tile right here, we can see that it can still cast the spell on top of them, and that's not good. That's really not good. So we want to fix that. And also, if I cast my AoE spell, let's say right here on a valid tile, we can still see that my AoE effect still targets the obstacles and the other invalid tiles right there. And that's not good either. So we want to filter out all those untargetable tiles from the range logic completely. So let's go do that real quick before ending the video, and that's going to be inside the combat system. And if you remember, we already have a function that filters out some indexes. We have the remove indexes without line of sight function right here. This function is already looping through all the indexes that we want to check, and then comparing them, and then removing the ones that we don't want. And actually, we're not going to use the same function because it's not really the same logic, it's not really the same functionality, but we're going to copy it because it's going to be pretty similar. So let's duplicate that function and rename it remove not walkable indexes. So the indexes that are not walkable on the grid, we want to remove them. And now let's remove everything related to the line of sight, so I can just delete all that. And actually for the inputs right here, I'm not gonna need the origin index nor the cast index. We just need the indexes that we want to filter. And now instead of the as line of sight, we're gonna use the isTile walkable function inside the grid. So we can just connect it like so, the same way it was connected before, but with the new function now. Great, so that's the new function that filters out everything that is not walkable on the grid, and we can just go implement that function inside the get spell range, which is both used for the AoE and the not AoE spell, so that's exactly what we want. And what I'm gonna do is just give myself a little bit more room here in the middle, and before doing everything else, I'm just going to filter my indexes. So I'm receiving my indexes from the get pattern and range. Here we go, I take those indexes, I filter them, and then we can continue executing the same code that we were executing before. So we are going to filter out all the indexes we don't need in between the two blocks that we have right here and right there. So great, that should work and it should fix the problem. So let's see how it goes now. And yep, that fixed the problem completely. Right here, if I try to cast my spell on top of my obstacle, we can see that it is not possible. I can't, so that's good. I'm not able to target any of my obstacles or the tiles that are outside of the grid right here and right there. So that works. And if I try to cast my spell around my obstacles right here, we can see that it is supposed to target those tiles also, but it doesn't spawn any red cubes on top of the obstacle, which is exactly what we want. We don't want to spawn my spell, we don't want to cast it on the obstacles because we're not really targeting those tiles. And same thing for the tiles that are outside of the grid right here. If I try to cast my spell in the corner, we can see that it stays in the corner. It doesn't cast and affect any of the tiles that are outside of the grid. Great, so that works, and the mechanic I think is pretty much completed. So great, I think that's gonna be it for today, and I'm gonna see you in the next one. So bye bye!